First, I want to apologize for being a few minutes late. It'll never happen again. First order of business is who's going to volunteer to take the minutes?
You mind, can you take minutes down at the end? You've got a pen?
I do have a pen.
There we go.
I knew I should have brought one.
Well, you want to send them in, I'll take them. Doesn't
Well, I
matter.
have one you
No,
can
I'm
borrow
just
if it doesn't work.
I'm kidding.
I just want to remind the members of the commission that we're down one person now at this point with the departure of Bob, and you're about to be down two with my departure. So I know that it's been advertised, the position has. I don't believe anyone's applied for it in the last couple of months. So
Spread the word.
spread the word. Get your relatives and your friends. The only qualification they need is they need to be a Middletown resident. And when I depart, I leave it to you folks to appoint a chairman, vice chairman, and another secretary. Just coordinate what you do with Wendy Marshall. Let her know what's going on, and she'll make it official. Okay, first order of business is reading of the minutes from the last meeting, which we're not 100% certain when that
We didn't
was.
actually have a meeting. It was in November. It didn't happen.
Yeah.
It was due to the lack of notification. So
Right.
we came and none of the applicants did, so there was not a meeting held.
So I believe that I did the minutes for it, and it basically came out. We weren't able to hold the meeting, and
Yep.
the meeting was adjourned, so. That's the reading of the minutes. The first case on our list will be the Sonic MRI gas station.
You
on
had
Westmead
the,
Ultras. What's that?
you had the acacia as number one on your
Oh,
agenda.
that's number one?
On the agenda.
Can I change the agenda midstream?
Yes, you may.
It's just that this is the older of the two cases. And I'd love to be able to put this to bed. But this is the ultrasonic MRI car wash and gas station facility on West Main Road.
Correct.
If you'd be so kind as to identify yourself.
I will, Mr. Chairman. Christopher B. and I have a law office at 294 Valley Road in Middletown, Rhode Island. I'm here representing the applicant. So I can provide you a little bit of background. I know you want to hear from the project engineer, Lynn Small, but I'll get to her in just a few minutes. So as you know, this is the proposed development will be the construction of a car wash, convenience store, and also a gasoline service center on the property. There will be 3 gas pumps for the gasoline service center. The car wash is going to be a little more on the high end. It's not going to be one of these facilities where it's going to be 1 or 2 employees in there pushing buttons and cars just go through on self-serve. It'll actually be a business where there are probably 10 or so employees on site. There's the car wash itself. There is also the hand drying and cleaning of the cars on site. And the convenience store is basically for people waiting. They're going to wait about 20 minutes to have all of this done. So this is in the general business zone for Middletown, and it's within the existing commercial corridor. So there is on West Main Road. It's actually replacing non-conforming residential property, so it's within the commercial corridor. It will be serviced by municipal sewer and water. There will be a drainage tie-in to the state's drainage system in West Main Road. So I believe you're going to see Ms. Small will discuss the stormwater runoff and the water treatment facilities on site. And I think you're going to see that it's a sophisticated underground system that's going to be in place. It's been approved, it's been scrubbed over by RIDOT engineers for some 8 or 9 months in connection with the physical alteration permit that's been applied for. DEM has scrubbed over it, is issuing approvals. And you're going to see, I believe, it's at a significant cost. This isn't a large commercial development, but that system, drainage system itself will cost in excess of $100,000 to put in. I think you're going to see that it will protect the watershed, the quality of water. And it'll actually, it's collecting runoff from adjoining rights-of-way and properties, and it will be a significant reduction in the pollutants, including under the existing conditions, which were residential homes. So I think it's a very carefully reviewed project. Not only did, of course, RIDOT DEM review it, but the technical review committee for Middletown reviewed it, the planning board reviewed it, all favorable recommendations for the project, and the town's engineers also reviewed it and included a few of their own recommendations, which we have adopted. So I'll ask Ms. Small to step up, and you can ask her any questions you have about the actual system that we have there for the protection of the water.
Thank you. Please identify yourself for the record.
Lynn Small, Northeast Engineers, 55 John Clock Road. So this site was formerly 2 residential homes right on West Main Road. On either side, we have commercial properties. To the back, we have the apartment complex, which I always forget the name of. East Bay. I apologize. The project did end up qualifying for our RIPTES permit because we have over an acre of disturbance when you include the areas that are off-site. There's 2 right-of-way areas on both sides of this property which we're entitled to provide improvements for. So when you incorporate all of those areas into the site, you end up with over an acre of disturbance. We're also on a state highway, 114. And discharge into the drainage system, so we had to do a DOT permit, physical alteration permit, which Chris already explains to you. The permitting through the state took a year because the site's very difficult to change from residential. It's a very tight site. We even made things smaller on site. We lost a couple gas station pumps from the original design. We made the building about 10 feet shorter in full depth. You don't get to see all that because that happened over that course of permitting through the state, where we had to make some concessions in our program in order to meet their criteria. At the end of the day, we have 2 subcatchments for this site, basically the property to the south and then the DOT state right-of-way. Because we have the commercial abutter to the south, we focused on making sure that there was a reduction in the peak runoff and volume to those areas. On the state right-of-way, we have a reduction in your peak runoff, but we do end up having a slight increase in volume. Now, I know you're all familiar with the state regulations, and they ask you to reduce the volume for the 10-year storm going into their system, so this was a bit of a challenge to get that permit. We basically had to analyze their entire system that we're dumping into and demonstrate that even though we have a slight increase in the volume, that the overall flooding that this type of system might cause on West Main Road would actually be reduced because of the reduction in your peak runoff. So we did do that analysis and managed to get them to agree with the project. Part of the DEM review, they had a specific concern with environmental conditions associated with the drainage system. They wanted us to So in this type of area, the best way to meet the criteria for your bacterial removal is by infiltration into the ground, or have a system that's on grade so that you can take advantage of the roots in the plantings that are in those systems, taking up that and giving you your reduction in your bacterias. For this site, because we had such an elevated water table, and it's a LUPL because it's a gas station, and then we didn't have any land area, we ended up with a completely underground drainage system. We have underground sand filters that that provide water quality treatment. Then we have an underground detention system that eventually all discharges to the state highway drainage system. In order to reduce those pollutant loadings, we have increased sweeping on site, deep catch basins to catch all of those additional sediments as much as we can. We ended up, as part of this project design through the state specifically for the drainage systems, on a conference call with all of the engineers at DEM that review drainage systems to go over how to address these concerns to the best of our ability for this site. And they all ended up agreeing that this system, we basically have a drainage system everywhere where we don't have a gas pump or a building. So it ends up being a pretty substantial drainage system. So we got those state permit approvals, and then we went to the town. And the town engineer sent this project over to Crossman for a third-party review. Part of their review comments related to the drainage were to try to incorporate some sort of groundwater recharge. We came up with only a very tiny, tiny area where we might be able to get the separation from the water table and put a system underground where we can try to fit it on site. So we do have that as a condition of the TRC advisory opinion. And that area is basically in the very south corner of the site, where we would take advantage of some fill that we have there. So we do have that sketch to send into the town engineer and Crossman for their review to sign off. The other comments that they had didn't really have any significant impact. There were a few typos on the project, probably because we tried to get it up there so fast, and that's our fault. And then they did recommend that we have a guardrail. On the southern part of the property, you'll see that there's a retaining wall along the car wash stacking area, and at some points that gets kind of higher. So we are going to be putting a guardrail over on that edge. Otherwise, the project had some waivers through the planning board, mostly because we don't have in front of the building, we're supposed to have a 5-foot landscape strip and a sidewalk. We don't meet that there. We do have it on the other 3 sides of the building. So that's technically a waiver from their board. I think that basically runs through everything on this project. I think Chris went through how it works. Basically, we have to show that we can stack 10 or 11 cars because it's a state highway. The town doesn't have any stacking requirement. But for this type of car wash, we don't expect that's going to be an issue because from what I understand from the owner, it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for each car to go through, so no one's going to wait 2 hours, you know, for their for their car wash. So I don't expect that it would be like a regular car wash where you might, you know, it's just an assembly where you're running through every few minutes. You could get that kind of stacking there. People are going to know. It's like $20, I think, for a car wash here. And they get out of their car, and then they can go inside the building, use the convenience store, go to the bagel shop, wash their dog. So there's multiple uses on the site. We do meet the parking requirements without taking advantage of, on the north side of the site, you'll see we have some drying spaces. That's because they're hand dried, and that's where they'll vacuum out the vehicles. So we don't take advantage of those in our parking calculations. We meet the parking requirement. We do have limitations on our entrance. The southern entrance, this was one of the conditions of the DOT approval, because of traffic in this area, is they have entrance only at the south end of the site. So they'll go into the car wash, or then they'll turn into the site. At the north end, it's exit only from our site, but then there is an easement to Ken Al's property to the north that we can go through their driveway. There's a 40-foot wide easement, so his curb cuts can be used. They're not necessary to make our project work, but we do have that connection included. So I don't know if anyone has any specific questions.
Could you describe the process of treating the wastewater?
I'm sorry?
Can you describe the process that you're going to use to treat the water?
From the car wash?
Yeah.
Yes, so we're subject to, because we go to Newport for wastewater in Middletown, so they have a pre-treatment review process. Basically, for a car wash, you have something to pull out the oils, and then you have something to pull out the sediments, and then it gets discharged to the sewer system. So we'll have a couple tanks. We also have oil water separators on site to make sure nothing gets into our catch basins and gets into the system either, from a drainage perspective. So we are doing what we can to protect everything. And then you have your standard gas station requirements with the concrete, with the grid around it that captures any small spills. And then the tanks themselves have changed over the years, and they're fiberglass. They don't really have leaking underground storage tanks anymore these days, because there's so many provisions in place where they actually monitor the pressure between the double-walled system so they know that there's a leak before there's a leak. So that's all strictly monitored. It's not like back in the day where you buried it and hope for the best.
I think there's some reuse of the water after it's treated, only a limited part of it. This owner also owns 3 other car washes like this. They're in the Long Island area. He's moved now to Rhode Island, to Newport. So he's been in this type of business for 15 years, and these car washes there are very successful, and went through the same pretty rigorous reviewing process also.
Is there runoff from the roofs that go directly to the sewer system?
I'm sorry?
Is there roof runoff that goes directly into the sewer system rather than being treated?
No, the roof is captured and run through pre-treatment
Okay.
or water quality treatment systems, and then it goes into the stormwater system
Okay.
after it's detained and all that, yeah.
Is there runoff from other properties onto your property?
There is some from the residential property behind that comes through our site that we had to make sure we could convey.
So that's taken care of?
Right.
Okay. How come you can have increased water flow into the sewer system that's above their regulations yet qualify? You said you had to go through a process to make that happen?
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
We had an increase in volume to
Yeah.
the stormwater system. It was a big deal. That probably took 6 months in itself. It was funny because it came up as the original comment, and then we said we couldn't address it, and then it came back right at the end of the project as, like, we're not approving this. So we had to go through there, and like I said, we had to analyze the entire system to make sure, just because it's a state system, this project didn't qualify for all of those analysis that we had to do, but the volume analysis that we had to do for the state was because that's their requirement. A 10-year storm, you have to retain your volume or reduce your volume, and we didn't have the space to do that. So we had to analyze their system all the way to its outfall. It discharges out in Bailey
So
Brook, out on
basically-
Valley Road.
They said that it wouldn't compromise your system.
It would make their system, this project makes their system better
Okay.
As compared to the current?
as compared to current
Conditions of the
conditions,
property?
yes.
So there's a separation, just to put this issue to rest, at least in my mind, there's a separation between how the water is treated that comes out of the sky and lands on the roof of either the building itself or the covering above the gas station pumps versus the water that comes down and hits the ground versus the water that comes off the car? Are there 3 different ways the water are treated, or 2 of those put into one and then everything goes out into the Newport system eventually, or?
So this project, we didn't have the space. Typically, you do collect all your impervious
Right.
area. Areas that land in pavement, you might do pre-treatment, whereas the roof, you're not gonna get sands
Right.
and stuff. So you might be able to bypass that, but you do have water quality treatment for all your impervious surfaces. On this project, we couldn't bring it all to one central location just because there's not enough space. So you end up with different systems
Right.
at different roof leaders. So you do have quite a separated drainage system here, and they all have water quality treatment.
Right.
And then they all end up eventually discharging to the state system because we could not infiltrate, because by the time you put your pavement down, provide the separation from the top of the system so it doesn't crush under the vehicular loads, then do your system, you don't have 2 feet to the water table.
So is there any impervious material at all on the ground? I mean, any pervious material at all on the ground?
Oh, we have landscaping.
Right.
Out both doors, there's wide landscaping areas along the entire rear of the building.
Right.
We have landscaping. I mean,
But that's what I was getting at. If you just look at the depiction on a percentage basis, it's got to be maybe 10%? Otherwise, you're looking at, I mean, I don't know if you've done that calculation,
we
but just
did.
looking,
It's on the landscape plan, but I'm not sure if you have that, because there is a requirement through the planning department. I don't have the landscape plan with me. There's a requirement through the planning department that you meet a certain percentage of
Right.
green space.
that's why I was kind of looking for that, kind of that understanding, because, you know, just looking at, for instance, the drainage plan is the one I have in front of me here. It tells where kind of everything's going with the lines, but it doesn't really give a good understanding of, it looks to me like it's one big piece of concrete with a little bit of vegetation along the back, and that's about it. Is that really what we're looking at? Because, and then if that's the case, every drop of water that comes out of the sky or comes off a car is going onto the surface of this. It's going to be, all of that water is going to be channeled into one of the different retention areas for treatment, and then all that water eventually, with maybe a small exception for stuff that's going to be recycled and put back through the car wash area, all the rest of that water is going into the Newport system. Is that right?
The Newports, there is no new
I'm sorry, the
state
yes,
drainage
yes,
system.
I'm sorry.
So we don't have a waiver for landscape areas. We meet the criteria for the town for our percentage of the site that meets that green space.
Okay. So even though it doesn't depict it here, or we can't talk to that percentage, that has been met in your
It
plans?
has been met because I have the list of waivers.
Okay.
And that's
Okay.
not on there. We did have building exteriors. We do have a landscape buffer. So we have a technical item here. The site, the property lines for the site, you have 2 residential lots, and then the apartment complex in the back owns those 2 rights-of-way that come along either side of the lot. With rights-of-way and easement. It's part of their lot,
Well,
according
that's,
to the tax assessor.
yeah, well, the town has it as part of their lots, but they're deeded, they were created rights of way. So when they did the subdivision some decades and decades ago, they created 2 rights of way. So it's essentially the same as creating paper streets.
Right.
So they pretty much have given up their ownership of that. They would have some rights, so don't the abutting property owners in that, but it's not technically, it's still their land.
Okay.
Such as in a case if there was an easement and they're allowing an easement to burden their property. These are actual rights of way.
Okay.
So when we went through the planning department, we did ask for waivers, because by the tax map, that's part of that residential lot, and the way the zoning ordinance reads is you need to provide a 20-foot strip from adjacent to residential properties or based on use or zoning. So even though the one on the north side is completely paved and it's used for parking and has a dumpster on it, it's still in as a waiver, whether it be actually required or not. They approved it because across the back, we do meet that 20-foot strip, which is the actual residential use. But the other waivers that we asked for were basically the one that I mentioned across the front of the building where we only have a 5-foot strip and it's a sidewalk, and then just the architectural materials for the structure itself.
I'm a little concerned that it looks like we're taking 2 lots that right now are essentially turf, 80% turf, and we're turning it into 1 lot that's essentially 80% asphalt.
Well, I mean, according to the local zoning, they're non-conforming as residential. They're the only residential on that strip.
How are they non-conforming right now?
By use.
Is that the only non-conformance for those 2 residential properties?
Yeah, by
Oh,
use.
Right,
They, in the general business, residential, single-family homes are not
Right.
allowed.
okay. So those are just left over from the last time it was?
Yeah.
Way back in the day, I'm sure?
Oh, I'm sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
and they were just rezoned and those people never
No, they never left.
got it?
So from a zoning perspective, we're actually bringing this site into conformance. There's no variances requested.
Right, but we're concerned more with water quality and that kind
And
of thing.
this drainage system is pretty extensive.
Right.
We've had several engineers review the whole project. All of them have ended up agreeing that we've done everything that we can on this property, including additional sweeping and vacuuming to make sure that the sediments are removed more often than normal.
So can you give us a little bit of insight, because that's always kind of a bone of discussion amongst folks here when they come before us. The maintenance, the sweeping, the vacuuming, explain to us what, I guess, agreements have been made in order to, or what would be the maintenance of the impervious surfaces in order to make sure that that vacuuming and sweeping to collect as much sediment as possible is done the way that it was presented to the folks that approved?
So we have an operation and maintenance agreement for the drainage system that we had to submit to the state agencies and the town.
Right,
And they're obligated by their approvals to comply with it.
okay. So
mean-
is it just, there's a standard and your folks have said they're gonna agree with the standard? You're just not in a position to tell us what the actual schedule or maintenance would be,
I don't
correct?
have that actual document with me.
Right.
But I know it was approved by the state and the town engineer and,
Okay.
you know, the TRC. It's an increased schedule. Unfortunately, we didn't list it specifically on the plan, but if you'd like, we can add that for sure.
Yeah, no, it's just something that whenever these come up, oh yeah, we have a great plan to, vacuum up our, pervious surface to make sure that it's not being clogged when they put down the pervious concrete system, and, we're just left at the end of the day going, well, I'm sure they're gonna do what they're gonna do. I think we've talked before that
Yeah.
the town really doesn't have a mechanism other than someone reporting them or them reporting
no
themselves. There's no enforcement of it, and that's why I bring it up, is because I know, as the chairman mentioned, going to, arguably 80% grass and dirt to arguably 80% concrete is something that when you just look at this from a drop of water standpoint, I know myself that's something that I have concern with, and that's why I was asking about how much a percentage-wise that you have, and I'm sure it meets all the standards, but it's just, that's a tough sell from a water quality standpoint. That's why I was hoping.
I mean, we do meet the
That's what I'm
requirements.
saying, I know you've met all the requirements
We exceed
themselves.
them, yeah.
On the plus side, though, looking at the grade, it
We
doesn't seem
do.
like there's any flow that's going to head toward Bailey's Brook. It's all.
So
towards
just
Westland
so that
Road.
you're aware, the way that the state makes us do the pollutant loading and the reduction is they don't let us just reduce it from existing conditions. They try to make us reduce it from an unused virgin site. So it's basically a forest. The site that's there today has a higher pollutant loading than the site that will be there once this is permitted.
Right.
From an environmental protection standpoint, that's significant because it's an improvement in pollutant loading, your water quality treatment, a reduction in the peak runoff, so everyone benefits from this project being developed.
What are the sources of pollution as it is in the existing conditions?
There's a bacterial, I don't know the name of the actual pollutant loading issue in this particular area offhand, but it's bacterial, and that's why it was difficult to do through the sands media, because you just don't get enough credit for that type of removal. So you have to do it usually through uproot and plantings, but according to Eric Beck from the DEM, the increase in the sweeping and the vacuuming of the site will significantly help that.
I'm trying to envision why there would be a bacterial loading issue.
Well, this eventually discharges into Bailey Brook. It goes all the way down to Valley Road and then goes into Bailey Brook.
Are there failed septic systems on these properties now?
I don't know. I mean, I know the state did a study that the town was involved in to identify areas that had these additional concerns. And then they identified specific items that we had to make sure our designs addressed. How they came up with which one was created from which source, I don't know, but I'm sure there's a report that you could read that they probably have in the planning department where they go through all of that. All I know is that the measure of that pollutant load was taken not from the existing condition that exists, but from basically raw land. So you're not just reducing what exists today, you're going beyond that. We already reduced what's there today. Our project did that before we had to talk to the DEM to get them to work with us on the additional sweeping.
And does the chairman just made mention of it, you know, a drop of water falls in the eastern or the back part of this property. Is there any grade that takes this toward the Bailey Brook area, the way it is presented?
Everything goes to the Bailey Brook right now from this site.
As you're going to build it.
I don't
The
understand.
proposed plan
Yeah,
has a drop of water
yeah.
hitting the ground that comes out of the sky, say on the back of this building,
Mm-hmm.
the paved area where the cars are coming out of the car wash.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that water going to go?
So it's going to go into a catch basin.
Right?
And then it's going to go into a water quality, an underground
Right.
water quality
And then
treatment
eventually
device.
it's going to get into the Bailey Brook area.
It'll go through our underground detention system.
Right.
It'll come through a pipe into the catch basin in West Main Road, go all the way down West Main Road, turn left onto Valley Road,
Right.
and then discharge into Bailey Brook. That's what it does today.
Right.
You have to mimic the existing drainage patterns. I mean, the sites on both sides of us do that today. So even though we're reducing the runoff that goes directly to the site to the south, that water all goes down to West Main Road and all goes into Bailey Brook. Right now, it goes down untreated. After this goes in, it'll have treatment.
Right. And I guess the concern that I would have is, I think everybody's in agreement, and you met the requirements that this would be an improvement over not just what's there now, but if it were virgin dirt or whatever the standard would be, as if it was an untouched lot. But at the end of the day, we're still left with 90% of this drop of water hits 90% of this ground, and eventually it's going across, you know, through at some point, some sort of a parking lot area before it gets captured by the retention systems, and then down the road and directly into Bailey's Brook. And I understand that's how it currently is, and this is an improvement of what it currently is, but I think what we're left with up here, at least in my mind, is this really meeting what we think is an acceptable use for this property going forward?
So if it's worth stating, the reason why we couldn't put any surface drainage systems is because West Main Road is established. You can't really lift up the site enough to get the separation from the water table and then discharge through the groundwater. right, which is, I think, what you're alluding
Right.
to.
Yeah,
No use can do that, because whatever use you have a vehicle that needs to get onto the site. And we did as much as we could to balance the site out. We have retaining walls to try to put in fill on this site. So you're never gonna have a use on this site that can create a lot of groundwater recharge. I know you have a LUPL because it's a gas station, but even if you take the gas station out, we can't do a surface drainage system for this site and get the separation from the water table so that you can infiltrate and still have cars get into it from West Main Road. It's just the water table's too shallow over here.
Anyone else have any thoughts or comments or questions?
I've got a few questions. Did you want?
Just wanted to clarify that you say this has been reviewed by the state and by the town's engineers and the town planning board, all of which have reviewed these issues and found them to be satisfactorily
Yes, we've
resolved.
received,
So
yeah.
we are the last wicket in this process. Is that it?
But you have an environmental approach to your review,
Look at
and the
different things.
DEM was specifically focused on the environmental improvement that was part of the drainage system. I know that DOT focused on the volume of stormwater coming off the site, but as a result, the town and state and, I mean, everyone basically benefits from that drainage system and that reduction in the peak runoff. So I understand what you're saying is that you're kind of the last to get a stab at it, but it had, from a drainage and environmental perspective, it was a very difficult design for this project. It was a difficult permit to get, but at the end of the day, the DEM and their engineers, the DOT and their engineers, and the town and their engineers all felt that we met the burden on this site.
So you all have gone through the engineering effort to make this work, and the state, the town engineers, and various interested parties have all agreed so far. So
Yeah, it took a
is there
year.
anything else that we need to consider?
I think we look at different things on those other boards do, so I do think there's things that we are considering that may be different from what's been discussed so far. I actually had a few questions I wanted to ask. You mentioned that this ultrasonic MRI car wash takes 20 minutes per car, I believe, and our typical car wash gas station facility, it's a drive-through, the water's coming on the car and it takes about 2 or 3 minutes. How does this ultrasonic MRI system work? Why does it take 20 minutes, and where does the water application come in? How long is the water being applied, and what's coming off the cars with this new system?
A lot of that time is when it comes out, and it's hand-dried, and it's vacuumed, and a lot of the cleaning goes on inside. So that's a significant part of it. The way the owner described, it goes through the car wash itself. The water is collected in large tanks. There's sediment controls and all that separation. He said there's a certain amount that's reused in some initial jets washing when the cars first go through. And then it's eventually, after it's cleaned in that, discharged into the sewer system. So I do not think, and I'm sorry I don't have the actual amount of time it's going through the actual, but it's not the 20 minutes.
All right, it sounds like
There's a lot.
it's a regular car wash, but you have a drying,
Yeah, it's free.
hand wash, or a
Yeah.
hand drying facility.
All the detergents
Associated
are
with
biodegradable. They're all are environmentally friendly. I mean, they've been, the owner says it's a time-tested or a system there. But I wish I'm sorry I can't tell you the exact time.
No, I wasn't concerned about the time per se. I was just wondering whether the process was significantly different than a normal car wash. It sounds like it's not.
Well, the actual washing part of it?
Yeah.
Knowing this project, the money he's putting into the building itself, he could put a typical commercial building there, flat roof and all that. He's put in a Tudor-style building in there. He's put in a lot of money into these. He told me the ones in Long Island are like $1 million, $2 million projects down there. He does high-end. He does, if there's sophisticated equipment for this, he would have it in there.
All right. Regarding the petition itself for the special use issues, now you have underground storage of liquid fuel at this facility, I believe, right? And it would be more than 300 gallons, right? So I think there is another variance that you need to request because one of the things that's identified in sections 1106 is that one of the things that says is prohibited in a water protection zone 2 is not only the car washing facility, but also underground storage of liquid fuel in excess of 300 gallons for any use. That says that that's not allowed for WPD 2. So I think you would need to ask for variance for that.
Yeah. Well, that one,
Okay, additionally, now this area, you mentioned that it's in a general business zone. I think it's actually general business traffic sensitive, right?
that's correct.
Okay. In the zoning ordinance requirement for a general business sensitive, business traffic sensitive zone, in section 720B states that in any traffic sensitive district, the minimum lot width frontage per lot shall be 300 feet. And your lots 115 and 116 together have only 241 feet.
Yeah,
And that's including the right of way. So it seems to me that you should be requesting a variance for that as well, your frontage
yeah, but
allowance.
we haven't been required to do that, and this, as I suggested, this has been scrubbed over not only by the zoning officer, but the technical review committee and all of that, so, but the different, that question alone, I think the fact that they're existing lots, that we're all set on that. I think there's another section in that, in the traffic sensitive zone, the provisions in the zoning code that allows us to go forward on that. I don't have the code with me right now, but the, on that part of it, the zoning officer has reviewed it. We will, we're gonna be before the zoning board tomorrow night. I'll call the zoning board, the zoning officer tomorrow and make sure that we don't need those two variances at this time. But right now, I'm not really prepared to really answer that right now. I don't doubt, I know what the language you're referring to is in there, I understand that.
I'm just pointing them out, not that they're going to prohibit the zoning board approval, but I just think for completion of documentation to make sure that it's totally accurate, that the fact that this doesn't comply with these two things, it should be identified in your documentation that these variances are needed as well. So I'll just point that out.
I'd be surprised if Mr. Kane missed that. If we,
Well,
I'm not saying,
everybody-
if we all missed it, I'd be very surprised, but.
That's why you have different boards reviewing
That's
the
correct.
process.
That's
Because
correct.
everybody misses something.
Thank you.
I think that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Lynn, my question is to you. Do any of the landscaped areas serve any kind of water retention, water quality function?
They do not. They're grassed, so there's that function, but did we make them into depressions? No. The ones on either side of the building, the intent is to have people sitting outside. And then you just have the one in front of the building, but it's a curbed parking area, so you can't really get into it to have any significant treatment. Plus, we had to lift the site and fill it, as I was mentioning, to get the drainage system to work so that we could have the line system and discharge. So that's actually kind of sloped up there.
How high did you actually have to lift the surface on average?
Well, it was, let me just take a
Sure. Just driving by it, it doesn't look like it's,
It drains from the north. You have existing grades around 107, and then at the front corner of the southern site, it's down to 101.
okay.
So there's a pretty decent slope across the site, and then we
Right.
tried to balance it because we had the two entrances that we had to.
So you brought up the southern end more than,
We brought up the southern end. If you can look at the sheet 5, you'll see our grading plan. At the northern end has very little grade change. And then at the southern end, you end up with kind of a good slope coming in from West Main Road into the site. And that's where we needed the retaining wall.
okay.
And in fact, we made that entrance onto that right-of-way piece just because it helped us get more distance between those so we could balance the site a little bit better. And then you can see the grade change across the front 10 feet goes from about 105 down to 102. So you can't really create a depression in there that would be significant
Useful,
enough to
right?
count, yeah. You do get uproot take in the plantings that we're proposing on site and the grass areas, but we weren't able to make any specific depressions. Does anyone have any other questions?
Does anybody have any motions in mind we think you ought to do with this project? I think the concerns that Mr. Hall brought up regarding the requirements and additional variances is something that we need to run it to ground, basically.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think what we might do is just include it in our minutes as something that we observed and then just forward it to the zoning board for their review and consideration.
If that's acceptable to the board, then, I'll go with that.
Is that one more question, Ms. Small? Sorry. In the information that was provided from the planning department, it does talk about the watershed protections district zone 2, regarding the planning board's review, the following development design standards are required, blah, blah. Surface water runoff shall, to the degree be feasible, directed toward areas covered with vegetation to surface infiltration. Regards to these standards, and there's some other ones, the applicant has submitted the stormwater management plan. So just one more time, all of the plans have been submitted.
Yes.
They've all been approved the way they are.
Yes.
And there's no further recommendations from the TRC
Well-
or anyone else that still needs to be addressed or incorporated. Is that correct?
That's not true. The plans you have in front of you don't include the guardrail recommendation that the
Right.
TRC had. They also asked us to incorporate a small, or as much groundwater recharge as we can. We couldn't come up with much, but we do have something in the southern corner just as you turn to go into the car wash, we were able to, it's a very shallow system, but it was the only area we could find that we could get the 2 foot of separation. So
Right.
we do have that isn't shown on your plan, but will be incorporated into the final design, and it's a condition of the TRC.
Right, okay. So those 4 conditions of the TRC that they'd put out, the application proposing retaining wall, prior putting a catch basin, typographical areas like we talked about.
Right.
And the final stormwater management plan and calculations must be reviewed and approved.
Well, they were already reviewed.
That's mean they have been reviewed and approved. So
They
there's
have
nothing
been,
else-
right.
There's nothing else they were adding that was an impact.
Only that groundwater recharge area,
Okay.
right.
And that wasn't gonna impact the stormwater management plan and/or the calculations?
If it does anything, it'll reduce it because we'll be
Exactly, okay.
infiltrating that.
Okay.
Right.
I just want to make sure that there was nothing else pending for action other than the guardrail area and.
Right.
Got it, okay.
Yep, no.
Okay, thank you.
I make a motion that we accept the plans as submitted, as provided the 2 zoning exceptions are acknowledged by the zoning committee.
Anyone else?
No, that sounds like where we are to me.
Okay. A motion has been put forward to recommend approval of this project with the proviso or the caveat that the questions regarding the,
300-foot frontage,
the
the
frontage
size of the fuel storage.
what he said, are satisfied to the, are addressed to the satisfaction of the zoning board. Would anyone care to second that?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, let me say something here. I was just looking at my documentation. I think I may have been in error on one of those variance items, and you can confer with me, concur. I was just looking under the uses permitted in Zone 2, and it says with the following exceptions, and it says what's prohibited is above ground or underground buried storage of liquid fuel in excess of 300 gallons for any use. Then it says, except uses subject to the provisions of regulations for underground storage facility used for petroleum products and hazardous materials. So I'm wondering or thinking that this may fall under those regulations.
I would say.
And may be accepted.
I would say so. I mean, they're going to, if we construct this, it's going to be certainly under the supervision and control of DEM and I'm sure any other division of fire protection and so forth. And I'm sure there's probably, it might even be some Department of Business Regulation type of monitoring of the pumps and all of that type of thing. So I would say that's the case. That's what I just, we were looking at. Mr. Lynch kindly provided me with a copy of the code, and that's the language.
Yeah.
There is an exception if DEM is regulating the storage of the gasoline.
Okay, so I think the frontage variance is the only one that we want to forward.
We can address that. I haven't got to that language yet. I didn't want to prolong the hearing. I certainly, I think the form of your motion is fine, that it has to be addressed and resolved by the zoning board of the zoning officer, and that's fine.
So shall we rephrase it saying that we approve this project provided that the zoning board approves the less than 300-foot frontage for the project?
Yes, I would concur with that proposal.
So is that a second?
That's a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Thank you.
Passed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Sorry it took so long.
That's fine.
Okay, the next item, or the final item on the agenda, is the construction of a single-family dwelling on Acacia Drive.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Jay Lynch on behalf of the applicant. I've got an office at 97 John Clark Road in Middletown, Rhode Island. The good news is that this is a much simpler and less technical
You're not going to be
petition.
selling any gasoline.
No, we're not. What we have on site is a residential use. The current building on the property is a two-family dwelling. The applicant proposes to demolish the existing dwelling and construct a single-family dwelling on the site. This property is currently serviced by a septic system on the property. The applicant is going to cap and fill the existing septic and is going to tie into public sewer up Acacia up to Bliss Mine Road. I'm glad we can kill two birds with one stone. Ms. Small is the engineer on this project as well, so she can explain to you, the site, the issues that she's facing, and I think she's going to be able to give you evidence that this is going to improve the situation in the Zone 1 district.
Good evening. Lynn Small, 55 John Clark Road, Northeast Engineers. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that every time. So this site is a bit less involved than the previous project. The property is almost entirely within 200 feet of the coastline here. So we're within the watershed protection district. We're also subject to CRMC approval, but we have to go through the town process first before we can go to CRMC. The project includes the demolition of the existing structure and the reconstruction of a new structure. From an environmental standpoint, this is a win for the town and the environment, because we'll not only be providing water quality treatment for a site that has no provisions today, but we'll also be taking out the septic system and putting in a sewer pump station that'll tie up to Bliss Road, as Mr. Lynch just said. That pump station is going to be sized to also take the house that's just up gradient from this one too. So there's kind of a twofold benefit that the town will experience, at least over the next few years. I don't know if it's going to be right away or if it's phased in, but that's there to happen. The other benefit the town gets is that Tom makes us repave the road. So at least half the width, because this roadway is so narrow, you almost end up with a new road. The existing features that are on site include a tennis court that will remain in place, and then a pool that will remain in place. We have no improvements proposed in there. What we did agree to that's not reflected on your plans is, with the planning board, we agreed to pull that water quality treatment device up closer to the house so that it's not further into the grass yard, and it provides some additional separation from the watershed. So we'll be bringing it basically right up to the bottom of the proposed grade changes that you get from the construction of the house. That'll provide a little bit more grass for those, the overflowed water to run through before it gets down to the pond. We do have a small increase in impervious area, about 1,000 square feet after the driveway and the house is reconstructed, but since we're providing the water quality treatment, we do have a benefit, and we're providing water quality treatment for the whole impervious area for the house and driveway, not just the increase. So that's an additional benefit that you experience. Like Jay said, we do have municipal water, we'll have municipal sewer, electricity, but basically those are the improvements for this project. Once we finish tonight, tomorrow we'll be in front of the zoning board for our special use permit because of the watershed protection district, and then we'll be able to go to CRMC where they'll do their review specific to the coastline.
So how large is the structure that's there, square footage? Because all we have is the proposed conditions. We don't really have a comparison, at least I don't think I have it in front of me.
Existing structure is approximately 2,400 square feet.
And how big is this one gonna be?
I think it's going to be approximately 3,200 square feet.
Okay. And it's just physically, the footprint is larger, correct?
The footprint is larger.
Okay.
I think it's an existing two
Yeah, that's right.
unit,
It's 2 units existing, so it's going to a single.
going
family.
to a single.
Right, okay.
And then the rest of the area that I estimated in 1,000 is because we have a small sliver of driveway. Because we actually have a garage as part of this house where
Right.
you don't have that today.
And the residence that's upline that, I guess is, do they currently have their own septic system?
Yes.
They do. So basically, the municipal sewer line that you're going to be putting with some sort of pump station, you'd indicated is going to basically take care of the sewage from the existing house as well as this proposed house and pump it up Acacia Drive up toward, is it Bliss Minor? I'm not quite sure,
Right.
right?
I'm not sure of the timeline on the other house. All I know is that I was asked to make sure that the pump station's big enough to take both homes.
Okay.
And that we placed it in a location where we could easily tie both homes into it. So that's why it's on the upland side of the house.
So I'm assuming the sewer line is going to go right up Acacia Drive, and that why the repaving of Acacia Drive, once you dig it up to put the sewer line in,
That's this.
you basically, okay. Are the
Right,
houses
sure.
upline from this one on Acacia Drive? Do you know if they currently are on septic? Any idea?
Other houses?
Yes,
I know
that are on
that
Acacia
my
Drive.
office specifically there's 2 acacias, right.
Right, on the south.
so I don't know which one's which, for who I did stuff for, but I know I've done it for 4 acacia, 6 acacia, and I know the one at the end of the road
Right.
that's, I guess, north of this site, they're also tied in, but I didn't work on that
Okay.
project.
So I
there's
guess what I'm
several.
getting at, will it be a completely new or sewer line? There's nothing existing that's coming off of, if it's Bliss Line, whatever the top of Acacia South is it a completely new sewer line that's gonna go the full length of Acacia South down to these 2 properties?
I don't know if that's been fully vetted yet. I know from an engineering standpoint, you could tie 2 or 3, definitely 2 or 3 houses in a 2-inch line with check valves. It depends on if people are open to that
Okay.
sharing of the line. A lot of times people are not. I do a lot of the sewer connections down on Brenton Road, and they don't like to share. I mean, yeah, Brenton Road
Right.
in Newport, and people are hesitant to share their line. They
Right.
just don't want to
Yeah,
get
deal
in.
with the hassle in case
Yeah.
something doesn't work out,
I
right?
mean, you benefit from the system no matter what, and it can be engineered either way,
Right,
you know, so.
okay.
That proposed pumping station that you mentioned, that's not shown on this existing drawing,
It
is it?
should be. I believe that's the circle you see on the uphill property line.
Oh, that little circle with the X?
Little circle with the S.
Okay.
I drove down there the other day, and it says Hawk Resort at the bottom, am I wrong?
I'm sorry?
It says Hawk Resort at the bottom of that hill. Is they gonna close the resort?
Well, no, they own both properties. At one point, this was a timeshare property.
Okay,
Current owners, and I think the timeshare was dissolved several years ago.
okay.
The current owners both properties. One of them is being turned into a single family.
The other one's gonna stay a timeshare or what?
No, the timeshare is gone.
Okay.
It's a 2-unit.
It's just gonna be a house, okay.
It's gonna be a house.
And how come at the top of the Acacia Drive South, the address of the top house is 32? And you're saying this is the one at the bottom is 32? I don't understand the address difference. Is there a,
The addresses were interesting for the site. Between 30 and 32, we weren't sure, but definitely the site is 32 from what we ended after the research we
that's what the
did.
house at the top is labeled as.
Is it not? It's
Right next to
not
Bliss
temp-
Vine is 32 Acacia Drive, South Acacia Drive.
Interesting.
So,
I mean,
I don't
I'll
know.
check, but that's the address they have on the
I believe you,
house.
I just,
Yeah,
it was confusing.
it is a confusing little area.
One of the things that makes me nervous with a pump system is power failures. And I was wondering you know, how long can the system operate without power? And are there any provisions for emergency power, supplemental power?
So we haven't done the full sewer design yet, but typically our clients have a choice between providing some additional storage in their wet well, or having a generator for their pump.
But is there a requirement to have either or?
There's no requirement that I know from the town. I know from a state perspective, if you were working at DEM, you know, their septic systems, they require 24 hours of storage within the system for those things. You still want to make sure that you're not using a lot of water during power outages that last for a period of time. When we do these designs too, there's also, your actual water use is about 60% of what we're designing for, you know, in reality, and that's per day with everything going. I mean, you'd probably be smart enough not to wash your laundry during a power outage or run your dishwasher because you won't have hot water unless you have a generator. You know, so your water use is usually limited anyway. Just because if you don't have a generator, you don't have heat usually, so you won't have a hot shower, you won't have hot water for your dishwasher, so your water uses go down anyway. So I've never had anyone have an issue with those provisions included.
In that same vein, are the utilities in this area, are they buried? Are they underground utilities or are they?
I think the utility, you mean the electric,
Yeah,
is not underground.
it's not.
But if you have a power outage, then there would be no flow from
You'd
the
get water,
system.
you just don't have hot water.
Groundwater,
You do have
but
water.
no drainage.
Right. The pump's not gonna pump water back up the pipe.
The pump is where it
Reasonable.
stops, so it
Right.
would go through your sewer system into the
Right.
pump station,
Right.
and that's where we provide the extra volume. A lot of people have generators these days just because they're not.
Right.
I bought one recently, so my road is clear. We're good for 5 years or so. But yeah, it's good to have, especially for a pump station. I found the heat was the bigger driver for me.
As far as the landscaping goes of the property itself, the tennis court's going to remain, as you'd indicated. I'm assuming, just looking at the grade of the property, it all slowly ends up going down toward the reservoir / lake, are there any requirements or any provisions put in place to establish buffer zones to keep fertilizer and those types of things from ending up in the water supply, or?
I don't know if there's anything in place today, but that's certainly something that can be added now.
On the plan itself, there's no designated,
And I think that was a condition on the planning board, did put that condition on
Oh,
as
they
well.
did, you're right.
So we did with that condition, not to use
That's-
fertilizers, making fertilizers.
That's pretty much automatic. We've added onto it,
Mhm.
anything, anytime something's built in zone one.
So that was one of the conditions for the planning board's recommendation.
okay. And are there, do we know, are there requirements on what they can and cannot clear between the edge of the water line and, you know, the back door?
The city of Newport owns
Right,
anything that's adjacent to it, so there's a fence that's there, everything on the east side of the fence is owned by the city. of Newport.
city, and the owners would be clear to do with what they want up to that fence, right?
Is there still an issue with storage of chemicals on the property? Used to be another property you put in.
We typically ask for limiting the storage of chemicals and whatnot.
That may have been included as
Typical
well in the
residential.
planning board's recommendation. We don't anticipate storing any chemicals.
Yeah, that's probably already in there. But we'll add it on as well.
That's fine.
Before you go, I see on the drawing here, there is a septic field behind the house, which I assume is probably the previous septic field for the current houses in place.
Yeah,
Is
the
that
trench
correct?
system that you see
Pardon?
just on the coastal side of the new house.
Yeah, on the back here.
Oh, yes, that's the one for the other house.
The current house that's in place, or?
So the
Property.
one over here
Oh, that one over there?
is for this house that we're
Oh, I see.
abandoning that septic system, but the one that's on the upland side of the new house is for the house that's uphill.
Okay.
That's the one we would abandon once they tie into the pump station.
All right.
Has the planning board made a site visit?
They did.
They did.
It's a skinny road, we wouldn't all fit that.
That probably
That little narrow road would have created traffic issues.
I had
The neighbors
difficulty,
would have complained.
I had difficulty turning around.
Yeah, it's a tough road.
Okay. Does anyone have any thoughts on how we should proceed?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that the Conservation Commission goes forward with a positive endorsement.
Any caveats other than the household chemicals? I'm sorry? I say I have no problem. I don't either. Anyone on this end of the table?
I think the usual zone 1 provisions that we've always put in there,
Yeah.
storage of chemicals, lack of
Erosion
chemicals.
control during
Yeah, residential only type, fertilizers or anything
any
like that.
quantities,
Yeah.
Okay.
I noticed in the planning board's endorsement letter, they put a lot of that stuff in
Right.
their letter already.
Yeah, we looked at this pretty closely on the planning board
Mhm.
and made a number of those recommendations.
Okay,
I second that motion.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No new business, correct?
There is no additional business, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Didn't think so. The meeting is adjourned.
Are you gonna look at the new chairman at some point?